Hello and welcome to this webinar for boards of international schools looking at governance as leadership in challenging times. As with all my video materials, it's my intention to make this webinar as accessible as possible by using plain language that's not overly full of jargon as far as possible, and to make it engaging and thought-provoking so that it leaves you with thoughts and questions that you might further reflect on and ultimately ask good questions in your board deliberations. Now, I can appreciate that there are many different types of boards, whether not-for-profit or proprietary, parent-elected, or maybe more like a corporate appointment style board. But whatever the makeup of your board, there are some common challenges being faced right now by international schools around the world, as pretty much everyone is trying to come to terms with the short and long-term impact of COVID-19 for international schools. Let me first outline the scope of the webinar today by starting with the end in mind. My goal over the next 40 minutes or so is to provide you with insights as well as reflective questions to help you put your school's current challenges into perspective and for you to walk away with a deeper appreciation of your responsibilities as a trustee or board member and some strategies for what you might want to start developing further in your school. So let me give some perspectives on the term governance as leadership. Obviously, this is the title of the webinar, but it helps to preload some thoughts related to this term as background for you, upon which I want to build so that the reflections and strategies for you are put into perspective. This term governance as leadership was coined by a couple of Harvard professors, William Ryan and Richard Chait, along with Barbara Taylor, around 2003, when they first published materials that created a new model of effective governance. Their research looked at school boards, hospitals, museums, you name it, any type of boards, mostly non-profit. And they were trying to understand the common features of highly effective boards. What they discovered may sound obvious, and yet still so many boards don't really get it and as a result perpetuate ineffective styles. But at the heart of the issue, as they defined it, was the problem of performance was actually a problem of purpose. It's easy for boards to focus on accountability, and often harder to see the relationship of the board's work to the school's mission. And this makes it more difficult for board members to become engaged or to enjoy their work. And so the natural solution would be to enrich the work of the members as a means to improving the effectiveness of the board. If people are interested and engaged, they'll be more motivated and connected to the success of the board. But that's somewhat easier said than done, of course. So to better understand the relative levels of engagement by senior leaders in the board, Ryan's research explored 4 profiles of governance. Governance by default, where neither the board nor senior staff played a significant forward-thinking leadership role. Governance by fiat. The definition of the word fiat means an authoritative decision or order. So governance by fiat means the board imposed most decisions from the top down and simply expects compliance. Executive governance, in which the board is largely a silent partner while the CEO or head effectively governs. And fourth was shared governance, where senior staff and the board are active participants in the process of governance. And so actually this is a good moment to pause and reflect on your own school and board. How would you characterize the governance in your school? Is it governance by default or governance by fiat? Was it executive governance or a shared governance? And to what extent do you think other board members or senior staff would agree with you? The beauty of Chait and Ryan's work lies in its clarity. Boards have a fiduciary duty to protect the long-term interests of the school, which they classify as Type 1 mode of governance. This is where school boards often get stuck, acting as the sentinels to oversee the school's operations and finances. This oversight mode appeals to many board members as it's something more tangible or relatable to that they can get involved with, although arguably it requires very little understanding of the school or the local context and the school's mission. Unfortunately, with the COVID-19 pandemic wreaking havoc, the organizational chaos and financial uncertainty pressures the board to double down on their fiduciary oversight role. Chait and Ryan also recognized the strategic role played by the board, which they termed Type 2 mode of governance. In this mode, board members are setting priorities and monitoring performance and using their foresight to create the most appropriate strategies for the school. While not as prevalent perhaps as the fiduciary oversight, the impact of COVID-19 is forcing schools to reevaluate their strategies and priorities, and often pivot learning around the provision of online classes, but I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Chait and Ryan identified a third, Type 3 mode of governance, which they called Generative Mode. Whereas the fiduciary mode was to provide oversight and the strategic mode was to provide foresight, the generative mode provides insight. The key to this mode of governance is to make sense of the situation and to frame the problems before the strategies are devised. What Chait and Ryan observed was that effective boards work in all three modes as a triple helix. And it's the combination of modes, and in particular, the generative mode, which really taps into the individual board member's ability to connect with the mission and the context that was seen as the motivation that led to effective boards. Okay, so now here's some further reflection points for you to consider. Who decides what the school will pay attention to? Who tends to frame the problems and provide the context and understanding? Who decides what particular problems or opportunities mean to the school? And who links problems or opportunities to the school's mission? So with this background perspective on highly effective boards and the three modes of governance, and how engagement and motivation are often associated with a blend of modes, it's time to step back and reflect on the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. Most international schools had to deal with the immediate panic around March of 2020, which meant some scrambling to provide online models for learning in cases where schools were forced to close the doors. It's probably safe to say that you've had your own share of board meetings where you've been trying to get a handle on the current situation and the potential ramifications for the school. With so many factors, whether social distancing and hygiene in school or the financial reality of dropping student enrollment and having to balance the budget, it's been a stressful time for boards, for parents, for staff, for students, and for the head of school. Which leads to the second point of the webinar. What do boards do? Do now in challenging times and should always do. Chait and Ryan's modes of governance are a useful reference point, and the fiduciary aspect of governance is well understood and is one of the main jobs of the board, to be the stewards of the school's finances and resources. In its most basic terms, the board has two other jobs: to be responsible for the school's mission, which includes setting and monitoring policy and strategy, but also to hire, support, nurture, and challenge the head of school. Now, of course, I can't speak for all schools, but from my exposure and research, as alluded to earlier, there appears to be some common features of the challenges faced in international schools at the moment. For many, the switch to online learning has been stressful in so many ways. Certainly for the head of school and teachers, there would probably have been an astonishing amount of work required to set up the platforms and adapt to the new models of teaching and engaging children. And the stress is probably still present, whereas the initial panic of having to flip the classrooms to online and figure out the best strategies has been solved. There's the ever-present uncertainty that pervades classrooms now, whether classes will be open or online or perhaps planning for both. Parents, on the other hand, express different concerns. You may have some that press for physical classes to resume so that the important social interactions and activities can go back to normal, even though there may be a new normal now. While others want to work remotely even if classes are taking place physically, adding to the pressures for teachers. Aside from the worry that somehow their child is missing out on quality education, many parents agitate about the level of school fees being paid, which they say no longer presents good value with the breadth and engagement through online learning when compared to normal schooling. And while secondary or middle high school students probably adapted relatively smoothly to online learning, and many students may have actually excelled when given the agency of working independently, for younger children, keeping them engaged and productive while working online is a real challenge for both teachers and parents. With the shifting sands of emerging research, medical opinion, political positioning, and media reports, it's not surprising that the parent community is often conflicted. Now spare a moment to reflect on the responsibility placed on the head of school. He or she will have had numerous conversations with you, the board, but equally has listened to parents demanding the quality of education that they're paying for, who want more social interactions for their children or more online learning opportunities, and everything in between. At the same time, the head will have anxious teachers who may be concerned about working in high-risk environments or who are struggling to keep up with the demands of working online. Now, your school may have government or other mandated requirements for social distancing within the classrooms or cleaning schedules and any number of other small details that need to be factored in, but yet the consequences of which are not insignificant. And all the time, there's a worry that if a child or a teacher or someone in the community is very ill as a result of negligence in the school, then they'll be held to pay. But there's no real clearly defined right way, and each head is having to work with consistently high levels of ambiguity and associated anxiety. In simple terms, the board is responsible for setting and monitoring policy, while the head of school implements those policies. As an opportunity for further reflection for you, just think for a moment about the conversations you've had on your board and those involving the head of school. When you think of the implementation strategies for social distancing or protocols for managing COVID within the school, these are really matters of detail concerning procedures that are the responsibility of the head of school. But in these high-stress times, how much of your discussion has been getting into the weeds of the detail of the implementation rather than setting the strategic direction or policy? To what extent has the head wanted to engage in discussions with you, to bounce ideas off you and to seek your counsel? Or have there been aspects that, on reflection, you might say has been micromanagement? It's easy for the lines to get blurred. So, for example, how the school deals with distance learning for 5-year-olds would have been very different to 15-year-old students, and how feasible it is to create bubbles for younger or older children, or the safety risks associated with operating. These are all complex details. But who makes the decision to open or work online? Your priorities as a board may be very different to those of the head of school. And if you're a parent of a child in the school, then that adds another layer of complexity or bias. I'd also ask that you step back and reflect on the ways in which your board and community have faced the COVID challenges, particularly in terms of cohesion. There seems to be many international schools where communities have become polarized, whether through friction in the parent community or staff, or indeed creating splinters within the board. These challenging times have revealed insecurities that manifest in so many different ways. I've seen several schools where some board members appear to be supporting, whether openly or secretly, groups and meetings of disgruntled parents or staff that are rallying against the board and head of school. What happens next seems to follow a pattern where the disenfranchised community forms groups, often fueled by active social media chatter, and which starts pushing for more involvement with the school's finances or operational details and policies, and even matters of governance or the constitution. This is in effect trying to create a parallel board, but one with a very specific objective and that are not necessarily aligned with the school's agreed mission and vision. And of course, all this pressure within the community is coming at a time when the board and head of school have the existing issues of providing quality education, whether online or face-to-face, while balancing the books and adhering to laws and contracts. So, circling back to your role to support, nurture and challenge the head of school. Arguably, the head is being very challenged with the current circumstances, and the focus of this webinar really relates more to the support and nurture. Of course, there are some benefits, which we shall see, in keeping the board's focus on the long-term mission, and associated with that would have been priorities and goals related to the head of school's work, and these should be monitored and reviewed just as they would in a normal school year. Keeping this focus on the mission and strategic plan will encourage the head by signalling that the board is not interested in the micromanagement, but of course that means that the actions and intentions of the whole board are actually keeping the strategic at the forefront of discussion rather than the operational. Support and nurture are not the same, of course. And how these elements are woven into your discussions with the head of school should be something that, as a board, you've discussed and agreed. Now, before you dismiss this as too touchy-feely or snowflake talk, maybe think about it from the business perspective. International schools are very complex organizations that rely on personalities and relationships as much as facilities and textbooks, arguably more. Throw into the mix the fact that parents have a high emotional and financial connection to their investment in their child's education, and any complexities associated with board members being parents, you can see it becomes quite complex. Great teachers are required for awesome learning, for sure, but it's unlikely to happen by chance unless the environment is created where those teachers feel empowered, where there's an ethos that learning is meaningful and enjoyable, and where systems work to support learning across the whole school. And this is the role of the head of school, to create an amazing team of teachers, to develop systems that support learning, and to promote an ethos among the students that embrace the challenges to grow and thrive. That's not an easy task. Some authors actually cite schools alongside hospitals as the most complex organizations to manage. So the head of school is pivotal in creating a successful school. And the head of school is your responsibility to manage, to support, nurture, and challenge. Given all the issues I've touched on already about the implementation of effective strategies for online learning or social distancing and bubble teaching in schools, about managing to balance the budget while meeting the demands of quite polarized parents and staff, being a head of school is in terms of stress and responsibility, has skyrocketed. At times like this, you need your most critical employee, the head of school, to be firing on all cylinders, to have the strength to pull the community together with them, and to have the depth of reserves to continue working at full capacity for the coming months and years. So what can you do to support and nurture the head of school? First, you could have a conversation with the other board members about specifically supporting and nurturing the head. If and when the conversation deteriorates into a discussion of what's gone wrong or what hasn't been handled well or some kind of ad hoc appraisal, then the conversation needs to be quickly brought back to focus or managed in a completely different way. Creating a meeting to discuss how to support and nurture the head only to have it disintegrate into a general moaning session is entirely counterproductive, unless for each moan there is an associated strategy for support. What you're trying to do is identify where the pressure points may be with the head, to determine what support may be most effective, and to decide who and how that support will be provided. You could also reflect on the boundary transitions between the head and the community, and indeed between the board and the community. By way of taking a deeper dive into this area, look for a minute at communication within the school. And for many international schools, communication is seen as a challenge. A challenge to find the sweet spot of not too much, not too little, and forms of communication that resonate with the parents. In my experience, there's always parents that will cite problems with communication, whereas most of these cases boil down to unhappiness with the outcome or decision rather than the communication per se. It's not uncommon for a parent to come forward with a complaint about a teacher or a situation, or indeed how the school is managing COVID-19. And for every complaint, there's usually other, often silent parents who may feel strongly in a different way. Whereas parent A complains about a teacher and a lack of homework, there may well be other quiet parents who think that the teacher is amazing and the level of homework is just right. And so, in a lot of cases, not all of course, but a lot of the time in my experience, the aggrieved parents have been listened to and the communication has been appropriate. It's just not the outcome or the response that the parent had wanted. Now think about that from a governance perspective for a moment. Your appointment of the head of school is to ensure that the head operates within policy, but is able to interpret and make the best decisions possible to balance the needs of the individual with the success and mission of the school. As a result of this delicate balancing act, it's simply not possible to please all the people all of the time. And sometimes tough decisions need to be taken. Aggrieved parents are often seeking an outcome to better their child's situation and has a very short-term focus, whereas the head and the board, they're focusing on the long-term implications and precedent and whether the current case falls within the parameters of what's been agreed and established. So given the additional pressures and tensions surrounding COVID-19, there's even more need for the whole board to stand resolute in keeping an appropriate distance between the parents and the head of school or board, so that the head isn't simply thrown under the bus every time a complaint comes forward. From a board perspective, it's really important to be alert to the potential for a parent, a teacher, or a group to circumnavigate usual complaints procedures or grievance procedures and directly approach the board. When everyone is in a state of stress and where normal routines of school have been supplanted by a perpetual state of crisis management, it's easy to let procedures slip, and before you know it, you have board members in consultations with stakeholders or groups, often creating and amplifying any potential rifts within the board itself. Now, this of course takes courage and leadership to stand fast in the face of criticism. But if there are lessons of success that can be learned from other boards that have been through similar circumstances, it's that when the pressure's on during times of crisis are exactly the times when you need to dig in together and unite with a strong message within the board and of support of the head of school. Whatever misgivings or disagreements you may have, there are appropriate professional processes for appraisal that you as a board have at your disposal, but there's a different time and place for those. So as a board or as an individual, the last 12 months or so have probably prompted more than the usual amount of concerned parents or staff who are looking to bend your ear about whatever issue has got under their skin. As I've said, it's important not to allow complaints to jump past the established protocols direct to the board. And as part of that, you should probably have some stock phrases ready to share. Something like, I'm sorry, but as a board, we're focusing on policy and strategy. So this would be an issue to take directly to the head of school or follow the grievance procedure. If you're a parent serving on the board, it's also hard to decouple comments that your own children may have made from the necessary work of governance. Your child's experiences and comments certainly provide you with personal appreciation as a parent, but it's very easy for those perceptions to significantly influence your thinking on the board. While the parent insight is valuable, it needs to be balanced, and that's where having non-parent board members can be really useful. However, I understand it can still be worrisome that somehow there's information that you feel you should be acting on, and you may be tempted to create additional board committees or task forces to investigate staff morale or parent relations. But just be very cautious that these are not encroaching on the role of the head of school. While these committees may have very good intentions, they're probably much more into the operational domain and therefore a function of the school leadership rather than policy or strategic role provided by the board. And remember that your role on the board is to safeguard the mission of the school rather than represent a subset of parents or staff. And this is an aspect of governance as leadership where you demonstrate moral fortitude. You may well be faced with a growing number of demands from groups within the community, particularly parents, but potentially including staff, to increase the board's involvement or provide mechanisms for direct contact so that concerns about staff conditions or parent complaints get straight to the board. And this is a tricky situation. On the one hand, wanting to appear to be responsive and listening, while on the other, keeping the operational aspects safely parked with the head of school so that the board can take the broader perspectives with an eye to strategic success. And so it takes strength and courage to hold on to the principles of effective governance while supporting the head of school through these challenges. To provide a keen interest in monitoring the ebb and flow of parental pressure points without actually getting yourself entangled in the weeds is a delicate balance. You'll want to devise strategies for the head to report the results of meetings that he or she has held with stakeholders, so that the board can pivot quickly and adapt if necessary. Now, a word of caution here. In challenging times such as these, it's not uncommon to have a portion of the parents or perhaps staff that have formed groups to push forward their agendas that run against the agreed direction of the school. For example, there may be a sizable group of very vocal parents who are angry about paying full school fees for an online learning program, or a group of staff that are angry about their working conditions. These are particularly difficult situations to deal with for the head, and this is where you need to recognize the support and nurture provided by the board. Being the head can be a lonely job where every word you speak could be taken out of context, and where the community may be actively seeking discrepancies or where the rules haven't been applied consistently or fairly. It's tempting to ask the head of school to hold an open town hall style meeting, for example, for parents at these times. But what often happens in these circumstances is they're dominated by the angry and vocal parents. The parents that are happy with the work of the school are less likely to attend the meetings, and again, unlikely to be voicing their opinion with the same strength and vigour that the disgruntled parents will. Also remember that social media groups are rife, and it doesn't take long on WhatsApp groups to whip up parents into a state of high anxiety and anger. Inviting parents in for smaller, more focused meetings, say by a year level, may be a better plan of action, so that the parents can be listened to in more detail and hopefully reasoned with. But of course, this takes time and additional energy, especially for the head of school. These meetings will need to be thoughtfully prepared so that the head works with the relevant leaders and teachers, maybe to agree a short presentation and then to be open to comments and questions. Setting the tone for these potentially volatile meetings is important, as too is the need to establish some ground rules of behaviour and strategies for the head to intercede at times when the discussion becomes personal or overly critical. Trust me, these are not easy meetings to manage. So again, think about the perspective of the head, who needs to be assured that the board has his back, that they're not simply looking for opportunities to throw him or her under the bus, so to speak. Where's the head getting the support? He or she needs to put on a strong face forwards to the staff because everyone is working with high levels of stress and anxiety and they look to the head. And the head would certainly be wary of sharing sensitive information with acquaintances in the wider community. And so some heads may use support networks of heads from other schools, for example, or just bottle up the stress, or seek solace at the bottom of a whiskey glass. But as a board, you should want to ensure that your critical asset, the head of school, is functioning at peak performance, which means taking a proactive approach towards support and nurture for him or her. Take an interest in how they're coping and what mechanisms are working. Ask about his or her family, and basically reach out to reassure the head that you're there to support and not to criticize. So, you might say, what about surveys? Surveys certainly do provide useful data, and since they can be distributed to all parents, whether at once or through targeted year groups, they at least present an opportunity for a balanced view and tangible data that can be collected. Again, surveys are the role of the head of school, and it's critically important to approach the wording of the surveys with greater forethought. At the best of times, surveys can be seen as a way to vent poisonous opinion, and the wording and timing needs to be planned. A school-wide satisfaction survey may not yield the results you're looking for, and may just be a conduit for aggrieved parents to vent opinion about the head of school or the board or COVID procedures. Whereas more focused questions that probe deeper into the effectiveness of online programs in developing independent learning skills, or how clear the information to parents, how clear it's been, they may be more useful in helping to refine strategies moving forwards. While as a board you'll want to review the results of the surveys, including any free text rants or complaints, you'll want to ensure that the head collates the results and only publishes the summary information as statistics or charts. Some schools have gone further in their policy development to state that unless, let's say, 2/3 or 3/4 of the parents have actually responded, then the results won't actually be published, as this type of approach recognizes that there may be a silent majority and removes the ability for a small minority to use the survey to further promulgate their divisive agenda. So coming back to governance as leadership, of course begs the question, what is leadership? Well, as you can imagine, that's a rather large topic that would take a lot longer to delve into, but it might help in the context of your role on the board to appreciate the work of William Prentice, whose definition back in 1961 said that leadership was the accomplishment of a goal through the direction of human assistance, and that a successful leader is one who can understand people's motivations and enlist participation in a way that marries individual needs and interests to the group's purpose. I find it interesting that 60 years on, in a world that's changed so much, this definition still provides great insight. Of course, there's a ton of research and emerging leadership models all the time. You may have come across Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence, which he's developed into a set of 6 emotional leadership styles. And in recognizing that people within the organization or community are different, so different leadership approaches may be more or less effective. His classification of the 6 emotional leadership styles starts with the affiliative leader, who's concerned with harmony and finding a common ground through collaboration as a means to dissolve negativity. This style of leadership may be most appropriate when developing positive relationships and relies on the fact that the leader understands and values the emotions of others, and where the team result is affected by the lack of collaboration. The democratic leader appreciates the contributions of everyone on the team and their role in the decision-making. This style of leadership may be more apparent where team members have unique expertise that need to be brought together and when proactive decisions need to be made. The commanding leader is perhaps more closely aligned to a traditional military style or carrot and stick approach. In governance terms, this may be thought of as Chaitin Ryan's governance by fiat, where orders come down from the top and they are expected to be implemented without question or complaint. Of course, there are times outside the military where this style may be necessary and effective, such as where strategies have failed, or particularly when an urgent issue arises that requires immediate action. So, for example, if there's a government instruction to close all schools immediately, there isn't time for discussion at that point. The pace-setting leader is where the leader sets an example and has high expectations of others within the organization based on the leader's own model. This model works well when the team is already highly competent and motivated, and which thrives by the challenge and independence of getting the results. The authoritative leader taps into his or her own expertise to energize the team. The authoritative leader makes sure that everyone understands what the expected results are and has the ability to empathize with the team members and yet still inspire and give direction to the team. And finally, the coaching leader, who is concerned with the development of the members in the team by identifying strengths and weaknesses and encouraging people to enhance their capabilities. This approach often takes a long time, and so it's for a long-term platform for organizational change in which everyone feels valued and connected. Coaching leaders are continually having conversations to identify and celebrate strengths, but also to recognize difficulties and weaknesses, but only insofar as to develop strategies to build competency. Okay, so with the overarching premise that leadership is about understanding people's motivations and enlisting their participation that marries the individual interests with the goals of the organization, and an appreciation from Goleman's work that in order to tap into people's different motivation, different styles and strategies may be appropriate depending on the circumstances. And let's take a moment to pause and reflect on that. As you serve on the board, there will be decisions and strategies that you endorse that set the direction for the school, and thus you have a leadership role. How you respond to the challenges of COVID-19 or react to the pressure from parents or staff are reflections of your individual leadership and collective leadership as a board. So take a moment now, or indeed after this webinar, to reflect deeply about these aspects of your leadership within the board, with the head of school, and within the community. To what extent can you see Goleman's 6 styles of emotional leadership having an influence in how you operate with your fellow board members as that team, and how your board may be perceived from the staff or parents in terms of how it's leading the school? And so, whereas the work of Chaitin Ryan in understanding governance as leadership provides us with 3 modes of governance that helps boards balance the fiduciary responsibilities with a more engaging strategic and generative discussion, I would argue that governance as leadership goes beyond this. The role of the board is crucial to the success of the school, and during these unprecedented and exceptionally challenging times, The ways in which boards and board members demonstrate their leadership should be something that's a conscious strategy. More than ever before, the board needs to be united and to speak with one voice, and to be wary of any potential fissures that start to form, or where some board members may start to break rank and publicly voice dissent. Disagreement within the board is natural and can lead to healthy debate, of course, but with the clear understanding that given the opportunity to express opinion in the board meetings, once a decision is made, then it's endorsed by all board members. This is a time to circle the wagons and dig deep to understand the motivations and disturbances within the board as well as within the wider community, and to use that understanding positively by using appropriate leadership strategies within the board and with the head of school that inspire confidence and trust, and publicly demonstrate your support of the whole board and of the head of school. When parents or staff detect a splinter group forming within the board or ways to disturb agreed grievance procedures, you can be sure that during these times of high stress and rapidly changing circumstances, there will be groups that exploit weakness for their short-term benefit. Your role on the board is to ensure these difficult times can be weathered successfully, but still with one eye on the strategic success of the school, arguably beyond the time span of the current group of aggrieved parents or staff with their pressing concerns. And all of this takes moral strength from you individually and collectively as a board. But make no mistake, this leadership will determine how your school emerges from the COVID challenges over the coming years. And finally, as you reflect on the composition of your board and the potential opportunities to enlist the support of new board members over the coming months, whether through elections or appointments, are there particular aspects or skills or attributes that you think may be more helpful in bringing clarity and impact to the work of your board? So thanks for tuning in. How did we do? My goal was to share practical insights on governance and leadership that are relevant to boards, and to leave you with a deeper appreciation of your role and some strategies to reflect on. If this webinar resonated with you, then you may be interested in the Board Essentials series of over 40 videos I've produced for boards of international schools that feature broader overarching ideas of governance as well as deep dives into specific areas relevant for international schools. Head over to the website www.internationalschoolboardtraining.com for more information. Thanks again.